Okay, so the next concept I want to touch on briefly is the ecological footprint. So we talked about how many people are on the planet, and it's a lot. And so you might think that, more people is definitely worse for the environment, but it really depends on how many resources those people use. So the ecological footprint is the impact of a person or community on the environment expressed as the amount of land required to sustain their use of natural resources and absorb the amount of waste that they produce. So this includes things like your carbon footprint, which has to do with your individual impact on climate change. It includes how much land is used to grow the food you eat, how much land is used to put all your trash in, how many forests are required to purify the air from the pollution from your car, all those sorts of things. We have seen that over time that the average ecological footprint um, of the average person, so averaging across all the people on the whole planet, it has gone up over time. So one is the number of Earths that we have, which you can see on the x-axis. This is the number of planet Earths that we need. And this is a little bit confusing. If you've taken 212 with me, you already know how this works. But basically, the Earth produces a certain amount of resources every year. If we only use the amount of resources produced that year, then we're operating sustainably and we're not dipping into resources that were created in previous years. If we need more than one Earth, that means that we're not only using all the resources that were produced this year, we're using some resources that were produced a previous year. And so we can maybe do that for a little while, but eventually we're going to run out of resources that were generated in previous years, and we're just going to run out. We also know that different income groups use different amounts of resources and have different ecological footprints. This is in, so this says ecological footprint on the y-axis, and it's in global hectares per capita. So if you don't know what a hectare is, it's a unit of area, kind of like an acre, but it's pretty big. I believe it's 10,000 square meters. But anyways, the idea is the unit of area on the Earth. There's only so much area on the Earth. So we can see that the world biocapacity is going down. So the amount of resource per person is going down. Part of that is because there are more people, so there's less land available each year for each person, land and water. But also, as we degrade our ecosystems aren't able to produce as many resources. So that's kind of a problem. If we mess up the ecosystems, they can't produce as many resources, but we're using so many resources, we're using more than are produced in a year. So that can be a problem. We see that low-income people have the lowest ecological footprint and tend to be the most sustainable because they're using the least amount of resources. Middle-income people don't use many more resources than the low-income people do, but a bit more. Whereas high-income people use a lot more resources than everybody else. And from a global standpoint, most Americans are considered in a high-income scenario. Though you know that people, if you've heard about, people that have private jets or things like that, you can imagine that their impact is going to be much, much greater than most of us that live here in Ruston. If you don't fly very often, you can keep your footprint down a bit, but still, on average, the ecological footprint of the average American is still pretty high. It's around needing 5 Earths if everyone in the whole planet lived like us. So it's still pretty high, but you can imagine that somebody that's very, very wealthy, that owns their own plane or has a mansion, their ecological footprint is going to be way higher. We can also look at ecological footprints by country, so you can see that there's a bunch of different ones listed here. You can see the United States, of all the large countries, United States is the highest, but there are smaller countries where each person is using more resources than the average American. But we have a lot of people, so ours is actually pretty important that it's high. Move this down so you can see this. So you can see, but almost everybody's footprint has been rising over time. We can also look at it by region, and we see that North America tends to be very high. The Europe is fairly high, and we see that the Asia Pacific region and Africa tend to be the lowest. And you can see that again here, where we see the United States and Canada and Australia and Scandinavia tend to be the highest. Other parts of Europe, as well as a few other countries, are kind of intermediate. And then everything that's green, like Africa and a lot of Asia, are on the lower end. So, current conditions of what's going on with our environment. As I said, the human population is at about 8.1 billion people. Climate change. We know that burning fossil fuels and deforestation is causing global climate change, as well as agriculture. Hunger. We know that food is not distributed equitably across the planet. So, in some places, we have plenty of extra food. In other places, there's not enough. We do also see that some of our agricultural lands are showing signs of degradation, which means that some of them may not be able to produce as much food as they have been recently. Clean water is thought to be one of the most critical resources in the 21st century. If you're really interested in water, I teach a freshwater ecology class every other year. I won't be teaching it this year, but I will be teaching it next year. But we do talk about water chemistry and water quality in that class. Energy, we know that fossil fuel use causes pollution, but we are shifting to using more renewable energy resources, but we could do it a little bit faster. Biodiversity loss, species are being lost at a really rapid rate. We are having extinctions on a rate much, much faster than at any time in recent history. And we also see that air pollution has worsened dramatically in a lot of areas. So that's kind of the bad news. And some of the things we talk about in this class are going to sound like bad news and might sound depressing. I know a lot of people say that about 212. We're going to be taking a little bit different spin and focus on the environment more than on species in particular. But there are a lot of problems that we need to work on. But I do want to point out that it's not all bad. So many cities are more livable today than they were in the past due to many areas the birth rate is stabilizing and clean technology. So we figured out how to do some things and not make the air as polluted. In the Industrial Revolution and a little bit after that, air quality in cities was terrible. And in the United States in particular, our air quality has gotten a lot better. Do we still have some air quality warning days? Yes, we do. But it's a whole lot better in a lot of American cities than it was in the past, even though those cities are much bigger. Health has improved dramatically. The incidence of life-threatening diseases has been reduced in most countries. And that's been a real win. We've gotten really good at sanitation. We've gotten really good at sterilizing things in medical practices so people aren't dying of, common respiratory illnesses as much. They're not getting infections and dying. Um, Going to the hospital isn't as dangerous because we know how to sanitize things. Our access to information and education is unprecedented in this time. We have, with the internet, access to more information than anyone's ever had access to before us. We also have a lot of access to education. A lot more people are getting an education than they were, even decades ago. We've also gotten a lot better at sustainable resource use and habitat conservation. Tropical forest destruction has slowed, and habitat protection has improved in some areas. We've developed some sources of renewable energy. Progress is being made in transitioning to these. If you go around Ruston, there are some solar panels on top of roofs. There is wind energy being developed all across the country. There's wave energy being developed. Some places are using geothermal. A lot of this is very exciting. They produce less pollution, and they're going to slow climate change down, hopefully. We've also developed some carbon markets and standards. We have cap and trade programs to help limit greenhouse gas emissions, and we have a lot of international cooperation. So some international environmental protection agreements have been super successful and have helped the environment and prevented some species extinctions.